Welcome back to Perspectives. Residents of the Syrian city of Deir ez-Zor celebrated on the streets on Tuesday after the Syrian army lifted an Islamic State siege of the city after almost 3 years. About 93,000 civilians had been trapped inside during the siege. In recent days, the government forces have made swift advances to push through IS lines with the help of the Russian military. You're now seeing footage that was released by the Russian Defense Ministry of its warship in the Mediterranean firing missiles at IS positions on the main road to Deir ez-Zor. The cruise missiles reportedly struck a command point, communication facilities, and arms warehouses belonging to the terror group.
This great achievement helps shape a strategic transformation in the war against terrorism and confirms the capabilities of the Syrian Arab Army and its allies and their determination in blowing a complete defeat to terrorism in Syria and plans to divide Syria.
For more on this story, I'm now joined by Matthew RJ Brodsky, a senior fellow at the Security Studies Group. Matthew, thanks so much for being with us today.
Great to be with you.
So we're hearing news of a victory in Syria in some senses, a liberation of this city. But looking at the strategy overall, it's not just about the liberation. What I want to ask you is, how significant is this victory for President Assad's overall control of the country?
It's really big for him. I mean, the population centers in Syria are certainly to the west, but Deir ez-Zor in the east is along the border with Iraq. It basically secures a large swath throughout the country. It also secures a major highway and land bridge for Iran to use through Iraq and through Syria. So it is extremely helpful for Iran, who is, of course, their patron. And this is really the last piece of the puzzle that they needed in the east. And if you recall, 2 months ago, that they weren't even anywhere close to there. They were all focused in the west until there was a ceasefire. So the ceasefires that the U.S. has been a part of in the south and that Russia and Turkey have been working out, those really allowed Assad a lot of time, unfortunately, to send everyone east and to capture this big prize.
Well, it certainly seems to have worked out in Assad's favor. Now, looking at another partner in this conflict, Russia. Is Russia's involvement likely to decrease anytime soon?
Maybe when it comes to the bombing and the military campaigns, but its overall objective has always been not the same as Iran. It's going to be focusing back along the coast where it has a new air base. It's going to be improving on its naval base there, and that's its main goal. Is it wants to see that. It sees Assad as a negotiating card, and so that's what it will turn to. I guess that's what it'll hold in its hand when they decide to turn to the United States and decide what they're going to do going forward. Iran, of course, wants to stay for the long term, and so does Hezbollah.
And you've taken us right to my next question. Does this really take us to the point where we can start asking that question again about what happens to Syria when this is all over? Has Assad regained enough to really say that perhaps he will come out of this in control, and can we start looking at what comes next?
I mean, I suppose he could say that, but the fact is we've only reset the situation to what originally caused the uprising to begin with in 2011. And again, that had nothing to do with Islam and Islamism. That had to do with him being a horrible and brutal dictator. So that's what caused everything to begin with. So I suppose the rebel forces at this point will have been beaten back, but this will continue again, and there will still be a ISIS 2.0 like there was an Al-Qaeda 2.0, and we'll be back where we were. As for the negotiations, that's going to end up going between Iran and what it works out with Russia and what Russia works out with the United States. There's a lot we still don't know.
And I think that's the key point. There is a lot we still don't know. Matthew, thanks so much for that explanation. Now, we're going to come back and talk more about Iran, but first we want to listen to some comments that we heard by the U.S. Ambassador to the UN, Nikki Haley, who argued today that U.S. President Trump could leave the Iran nuclear deal despite Iran's technical compliance. While she didn't necessarily advocate a withdrawal, she did criticize the deal, saying it's flawed.
Iran's leaders want to use the nuclear deal to hold the world hostage to its bad behavior. I am not saying this should go to Congress. I'm not saying we should get out of the deal. I'm not saying anything in terms of what should or shouldn't happen. What I am saying is we owe it to ourselves to look at every aspect of this deal and understand that this was a flawed deal, and understand that this flawed deal has negative consequences as well. Statement.
So, Matthew, back with you. Obviously, some harsh comments that we heard from Nikki Haley, a consistent line that we've heard from her criticizing the Iran deal. Basically, my question is, we know that the UN nuclear watchdog has said that as of the end of August, at least, in their opinion, Iran appears to be in compliance with the nuclear deal. Looking at the world at large, U.S. relations with different countries, do you think that the U.S.'s willingness to criticize Iran for this deal, despite reports of its current compliance, could discourage other nuclear powers, like North Korea, who we hear about so often now, from ever seeking a diplomatic solution to a conflict?
A lot to unpack there. Let me start with the IAEA aspect. They were supposed to understand 12 items of Iran's previous military dimensions that had to do with their nuclear program. They weren't allowed to do that, and the Obama administration decided they just didn't care. So basically, the IAEA doesn't know what it doesn't know. And what Nikki Haley did today was a fantastic job of fleshing out why that is so important, because it's not just the nuclear work, it's actually the military dimensions. And we see that today when it comes to North Korea, because they're trying to improve their ICBMs, and they're trying to miniaturize the warhead and make sure that it detonates. All of those are not strictly nuclear activities. So when it comes to North Korea specifically, we want no deal at all that would be anything close to this Iran deal. Is a horrible, amorphous, and flawed deal in many, many ways. And we should also bear in mind that what the United States does with North Korea is extremely important for how we're going to deal with Iran. North Korea has it's part of the axis of proliferation with Iran and Syria. And as soon as North Korea gets these types of weapons, they're going to share it with Iran. And while you're doing the anniversary aspect, on September 6th is an anniversary where in Deir ez-Zor, where we were just speaking about in Syria, where most believe that Israel destroyed a Syrian nuclear reactor. That plutonium reactor was built by North Korea. Let's not forget that. And this is where the direction is headed. It's the three of them are going to be working together on these types of materials. The U.S. has to do a much better job. So does the international community.
So, Matthew, just briefly, in about a minute we have left, with this in mind, these three powers working together, looking at the Iran nuclear deal specifically, the most pressing, perhaps, example of a deal that the U.S. could get out of if it wanted to, how does the U.S. move forward in dealing with this properly?
This is what the main discussions are going to be about upcoming. And for a while, it's been that the President Trump has really wanted to get rid of the deal. What he's probably going to end up doing, well, I shouldn't say that this is what he's going to do. We'll find out soon enough. But an option that seems likely is that he will decide not to certify them, which is according to 4 American conditions. That's very separate from the other aspects that the Europeans have to deal with. That'll kick it to Congress for a 60-day review. The United States is not going to end up remaining in the deal for a long period of time. It's really about technically which way they're going to do it. There's a lot of groundwork the U.S. needs to engage in with allies between now and then.
Well, as you said, it seems like Nikki Haley at least is starting laying that groundwork. Matthew, thank you so much for unpacking that for us, a very complicated subject. Thank you so much for that analysis. Coming up, war-torn Syria sets aside its fighting to face off against Iran in a qualifying game for the Soccer World Cup. We look at how this win may be giving Syrians a reason to hope after this short break.